Hello, Candy.
Hi guys, how you doing?
Good. Hi, Candy.
Hi, how are ya?
Oh.
Good. Hey, I gotta get something to prop it up so you don't just see my eyes. Hang on a second.
Brown eyes.
Yep. Okay, now we go. Here.
I think there's more people coming in.
I think we got a couple more joining us. Hello.
Okay.
How are you this evening? Sorry. Oh, no, you're good. Don't worry about the mud. It all vacuums up once it's dry. That's the key.
That is true. You do have to. Yes, you do.
Wow, what a nice library you have there.
Yes, they just redid it a couple years ago, and so it's like brand new. It's lovely.
It is. Great.
Scooch over, and then you can sit here by your wine.
Am I okay here?
You want? Yeah, you're
I
good.
got the most comfortable chair.
It's okay. We don't have to.
You're okay anywhere, aren't you?
No.
Didn't want anybody else to have to deal with it.
So Crystal, I didn't know you were a historian.
I came to support you more. I was hoping you were going to be in person though.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Well, thanks for being there.
Yeah, Eddie messaged me right when I got done riding and I was like, oh, I have about 10 minutes to get there.
Oh, well, sorry.
That's okay.
Well, I'm ready whenever you guys are.
I think we're good to go. A couple more people might join our Zoom as we're going, but I'll just add them in as they come in.
Okay. Well, why don't you guys introduce yourselves to me? I'm Candi Zion, to let you know. I live here at Winifred. And obviously I do these oral histories. That's kind of my bag. But tell me about you all. Who are you?
I'll start. I'm Samantha Summers. Everybody around here calls me Sammy Joe. I'm the librarian here in Geraldine.
And thank you for inviting me to do this. I appreciate that.
Yes, thank you for agreeing to do a Zoom with us. We know you guys don't like to travel in the unforeseeable Montana weather.
Well, and it's, we just never know, do we? Today it was 55 here.
Yeah, it's been lovely here, but if we would have scheduled you in person, it would have been awful, probably.
Yeah, probably. Right. Who else do we have?
You want to go around this way?
I'm Jerry Dostal, live outside of Geraldine, working for Benton at the clinic. I didn't grow up in Montana. I grew up in Minnesota, but I've been in Montana all my adult life.
I'm Paul Dostal. This is my wife, Jerry, semi-retired farmer. Zion's a name I'm a little bit familiar with because my Uncle Edgar Tacky worked for Scotty for years and years.
That was your uncle?
Yes.
Wow. So we're related then. Yeah, because Dick Tacky was my aunt's husband. And Dick and Ed, weren't they brothers or were they cousins?
Well, I'm related on, my mom and Anna Tacky were sisters. So I'm not related to Tackies, but yeah.
Gotcha. That's small world. Who else we have?
My name's Gary Sandy. I'm from Geraldine, Montana. I've seen you at meetings, like the APR meetings down there at Winifred and Rosetown. I think Rosetown. I'm somewhat familiar with the History Museum in Great Falls and some of the books that I think your dad wrote. I haven't read any. I'm too cheap to buy them, I guess. And I'm kind of interested in the history and archaeology and geology, whatever, anything that's ology around from this country, I kind of follow up on. So that's
And your first name was Jerry?
Yeah, Gary.
Oh, Gary, I'm sorry. Nice. Well, thank you. And then, okay, Crystal, you gotta go.
Oh, well, Crystal Joyce, I'm a physical therapist and I know Candi through barrel racing and I thought Eddie texted me that you were going to be presenting, and I'm always game to learn something new and get out of the house too.
Oh, yeah, good deal. Well, and Crystal rode one of my colts for me that is turning out pretty nice. So thanks for that.
Yes, yes. Excited
Yeah.
to see what she does. She's absolutely beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. You guys did great pictures. Okay, well, let's get started then. Tell me have you got some projects that you're planning, Samantha, or what would you like me to talk about today?
I would like to get some projects going on preserving some of our history here in Geraldine, but I'm not entirely sure where to start or how to do it. So just whatever information you have for us would be wonderful.
Okay. Does your library have a foundation?
We do, yes.
So you have a nonprofit? Perfect. Okay, cool. All right, so have you been applying to any of those the Montana History Foundation grants?
I have not yet, just because I'm not entirely sure what I should be trying to build or do. So
Okay.
I have not applied to any of them as of right now.
Okay, so are any of the rest of you that are there, are you working with Samantha on these projects? Is that something you're going to be volunteering to helping her with?
I bet I could recruit a lot of these people for their oral history.
Nice, okay. Yeah, because that's what it's gonna, well, you can do it on your own too, but you know, it helps when you have a village there to help you with all of this stuff. So I'll tell you, the reason I guess I've always been interested in oral histories and traditions. And I have been applying for the Montana History Foundation for grants for other projects. And I noticed that they didn't have very many people had been applying for the oral history projects. So it seemed, well, that's a great place to try to apply, and then it's not so competitive. But you have to go through a foundation or a nonprofit, as you probably know. Samantha knows this, but you have one in place, so you're set up. So you can apply for whatever project you want to do. So the hard part's done. The easy part now is to figure out what you want to do. And oral history projects are fun. I mean, it's a blast because you need to do your background research. Let me just give you an example. Let's say you want to do a project about farming in the Geraldine area from the Homestead period, and you would want to do your background. You've got your information right there, probably some great local histories about the area. Read up, figure out a little bit of the background, and then start calling the families around there. Try to get some of the older people, and the great time to do it is now. It's always now to do oral histories with older folks, because there's, I've had a few people that I interviewed that passed away shortly after I did the interviews with them. And thank God we had their history preserved. So this is what you're all about now with oral history. You're preserving their stories, and it's an important story. So the first thing you do your background research, identify who the families are you want to talk to in this project. And then you go to the Montana History Foundation website and start applying for their grant. And it's super, super simple. You just go right to the form. It's very well laid out. You just have to have your objectives, list of your board members, I think, on that one you need. And then your budget for how much it's going to cost, and develop your project that way, go for the funding. Also, they have access to MP3 recorders. So you can call, well, they don't necessarily, but the Montana Historical Society does through their memory project, Montana Memory Project, and anybody can get them. So if anybody there wants to do a project of their own outside of, like a group project through the library, you can call the Montana Historical Society Memory Project person. Her name is Jennifer Burnell, and she'll line you up with the recorder. And the recorders, they're super nice. They've got, the microphones are noise barrier type, so it can be a little noisy in the background in your interview still comes really clear through it. The other thing that I do is I purchased a program called 365 Microsoft. And, you know, it's pretty cheap. Maybe you guys see some heads are shaking, that you probably already have that. Yeah. And that's really great too, because you can take like you're going to do an interview. So you take your laptop, you take your MP3 recorder, and you don't have to have that. You can even have like a little cheap recorder if you've got one, but take it, set it up, and then you can have your computer on with the 365, and it will start typing the person as they talk. So it has that dictating component to it, which is fantastic. And in fact, I know a few people that use it just because they have trouble typing. So it's really good, you know, for older people, especially to use that, or somebody that has disabilities, and then they can type, it just automatically types out. But the bad part about it is that sometimes it's very creative on the words it hears you speak. But you got to go back and correct. After you get your oral interview done, then you're going to want to transcribe it, so you'll have a written record to go with it. And the written record, I send to all the repositories in the area, like you would have it. You'd send it to Big Sandy, Fort Benton, you know, Stanford, whoever else might be interested in it. But importantly, most importantly, the Montana Memory Project or the Montana Historical Society preferably, because then they will archive it and anybody can do research and they can have access to it. So you've got that done. I will tell you that it takes a really long time to transcribe an interview. I mean, it takes me hours. It'll take me probably 4 hours to do a 1 hour interview, because I'm very picky about making sure that's when I don't use 365. Because sometimes it's annoying. People that have accents, or like some of my Native American friends, you know, the words are, again, it's so creative that I just have to trash it and go back to the recorder and play it. I play it, have earphones, listen to it, and then I type it out. That's what I do. So it takes me 4 hours to do a 1 hour interview. So I always recommend that the best thing to do that I think is to get a lot of different people to interview and do 45 minutes, half an hour. And then that way it's more interesting to you, instead of, you know, being stuck in the doldrums of one person that's been talking for maybe 4 hours, which when I first started doing these was my mistake. I did that. I interviewed a person for 4 hours. Oh my God. Well, you can tell, if it took me 4 hours for 1 hour, it took me 16 hours. And I was so bored with it by the time I got done. You know, it was no fun. So don't do that. Just pick small segments of time. Plus, the other thing is, if you're interviewing older people, they don't want to spend a lot of time. They get tired. You know, it's a lot of work. It's stressful. You know, as soon as you turn the recorder on, people tense up. I try to lighten the conversation when I get there. So let's say I've got my people identified. I have my subject. The next step I do after I've identified the people is to set up a set of questions that I want to ask that person. And it's the same set of questions I'll ask everybody. You know, like, what's your birth date? Or where are you from originally? Where are your grandparents from? Where did they immigrate from Europe? What year did they do that? What was their occupation? Did they have any favorite kind of foods that they like to cook? What was there any family stories about, you know, accidents with plowing, or, you know, you can just be so broad and narrow it down to some really interesting subjects. But I don't always stick to those questions. I have that as my template. And then that way, if we get into a conversation and the people are going off track onto something else, that's sometimes way more interesting than what I would ever consider asking. So you've got those questions. Sometimes I'll send the questions to the people in advance so they'll know what it is that I'm going to ask of them. And a lot of times they'll be prepared. I also ask if I can have photographs, if they could bring their photographs. I set up a meeting place that's easy for them, like the library. I mean, that's a perfect place if you've got a nice quiet room. Pick a quiet room if you can. where it's just the two of you or family members with them. And you've got your photographs there. Take pictures of the photographs so that you can include in your transcript. Does that makes it interesting? Everything that I've done like that, where I take the pictures. In fact, we were just talking about one I did for Winifred last night. And a couple of the people that are from here, ranchers here, they said they loved the picture of Tom Ford when he's 90 some years old. I think he's like 96 years old, something like that now. But I interviewed him when he was 93 or 4. And one of the pictures is of him at a New Year's Eve party, and he's about 2 or 3 years old, wearing a little tuxedo with the top hat and a little tie, a little bow tie, and he's got a little cane and his little spats and these little shiny black shoes. And that picture has made such an impression on everybody that's seen that book that it amazes me. So, to think of it too, you've got this information of people's history that people are interested in. They want to know about it. They want to learn, and it's kind of unique too. It's unique to who they are, and it's unique to the community too. So let me ask you, are there any questions to this point? I know I don't want to get too rambly and get you bored.
Do you have any idea
I don't.
what you
Well-
want to do as far as history, or have you?
Yeah, so this is kind of what I've thought about doing, is getting like some access to like some MP3 players, and then I've been really trying to gain a teen audience, and I would really like them in on this, to where then we could record and transcribe, but then also record for YouTube, so we could have it on there as well for our younger generation that don't necessarily want to read as much. But no, so far I don't have too many questions. I like the idea that you have kind of an subset of questions that you're ready to ask, but as the conversation goes, if it's going in a better direction, you just let it go that way. And I think that makes a difference in an interview.
Yeah, it does. So let me ask you about the teens. What would be the subject matter that you would be talking to your teens about?
I would like them to help me really kind of get this off the ground, and for them to be doing the interviewing and them to be just more involved with the people in our community versus it being necessarily like one thing that we're trying to interview about.
Oh, cool. So when you were talking teens, I immediately jumped to the teens being the subject of the interview.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
No,
know,
I
that-
would like to be the interviewers. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Well, at some point you might want to even interview the teens, because if it's going to go on YouTube, if you want to really get your young people involved in the community, interview the teens, talk to them
Yeah.
about, what is it that, you can just be so broad and then specific too. What is it that you like to do in the Geraldine area? What's it like being a teenager in a rural community? How do you feel about what's happening in the world around you? What do you think needs to be changed in the state of Montana? How do you feel about our political situation right now? I mean, it could be that could be really interesting too, talking to teens. So think about that also.
Yeah, that could be a
Totally agree.
really, really fun thing. And it would get them interested too, because teens love to talk about themselves.
Well, and I think like from a community perspective, it's also knowing where the youth wants to take the future of a town.
that's a really good point.
So it's a really
Yeah.
interesting subject matter.
Yeah.
Now that's a good point, because what's gonna happen to Geraldine? I mean, are the kids moving away, or are they gonna stay? Are
Yeah.
they going to college?
Why, what are their plans?
Yeah. Yeah. What would keep them here, keep the town vibrant enough for them to want to stay and raise their own families here?
For sure.
Yeah.
So that's the fun thing about oral interviews, is that just like that, you can use it to your advantage. I mean, that's in a way of reaching out to people. Like this Métis project I'm working on. The ones I started out with Central Montana Métis, and Métis are Native Americans that are, they're Chippewa, Cree, Assiniboine, and Canadian French. So their history is interesting because they fled persecution from the Canadian government in the 1870s and 1880s to Central Montana and then settled. So I talked to several descendants. Then that was the first book about the Métis. Then the second one I wrote was on the High Line, and it was a similar situation. but a little bit different because a lot of the people came from Turtle Mountain in North Dakota rather than immediately from the rebellions in Canada. But I guess the point being that I have been told by a lot of folks that those books have a lot of meaning to them personally as Métis people, because there's books out about Métis and, you know, the history of them, but nothing personal. Oral interviews are so personal. When you open the book and you read it verbatim, when an interviewer is talking to, or online, wherever it's at, whatever your format is, someone is talking to this person they're interviewing, and it's like a conversation. Folks tell me that all the time. They just love it because it reads so fast. They read a book in a day, in a night, because it flows so quickly. The interview is asking the question and the interviewee is answering, and some of the things that they're saying are remarkable. So keep that in mind too, that you know, it's impactful. It's more, I think oral interviews is probably more impactful than any other kind of historical research, really, because it is so personal. The one thing I will also tell you is when the kids or whoever your interviewers are, and they get out into the community and start talking, is to be careful about if they get into an area that's very sensitive, like I did this in Lewistown, and it was not good. We got into the discussion about this gentleman's father, and his father had committed suicide, but he said that actually his father's sister, see how that worked? Actually, his father's girlfriend killed him, and that the sister-in-law was trying to cover this up. Well, I'll tell you that I put it in the book verbatim because he wanted it to be printed in there, and I will never do that again because it ended up causing some people to be very unhappy about that little bit of their history that they wanted to have hidden and not talked about. So just things like that, you have to be aware of people's feelings too. But I do these interviews verbatim. I like to do it verbatim as much as I can. Sometimes the interviewee will say, oh, well, I don't like the way I sound there. I've got too many ahs and ums, because I'll put those in there too, as it's part of their character. So I'll change that. And one lady, she was a stenographer, interestingly enough, and she wanted me to change some of the grammar to make sure that it was, you know, more proper. And that's, I did in a couple places, but not very willingly. It's more real if you do it that way. Any questions about that so far?
How do you know what to like leave out? Like when you said that caused a little bit of issues because people wanted it just left out and left alone. How do you make that judgment call on what to leave out?
Yeah, well, I think the way to do it is to either leave it out by putting a ... and then, but I'll leave it. The interviews I sent to the Montana Memory Foundation, the recordings, those are all, I didn't alter any of those. So if you actually go to listen to those, they're real. Some people will cut that information out. I didn't, and I haven't. But in your transcript, you can go, you know, the ... and just cut out that little bit so people will know that there was something else said, but that it's not to be discussed. The other thing I've done too is not change names, but to leave names out when they will mention names, so that it's kind of a mystery as to who that person is. There was one fella up at Browning, he was Chippewa Cree, and that guy he was super interesting. He's a friend of Jeff's and mine, especially Jeff. But his father was killed by his mother, and he did not. I tried to get him to talk about it because I really thought that it should be out there. It felt like he wasn't ready to divulge that information. The guy that was in Lewistown that told me about his dad, it was a cathartic experience for him to talk about it. But you have to use your own judgment to realize when, okay, that's too much information. We're just gonna leave that out. So it's up to you. That's just gonna be your call. So those MP3 recordings, it's pretty simple when you put it in the format that they need to send it to them, because you'll have to do on the Montana Memory Project, they've got a whole, whole spreadsheet of information that they'll need, like the recording date, name, title, subject, on and on, pictures attached, and then to use the format they want for that MP3 recording. But the cool thing is Jennifer is really good and she will walk you through the whole thing. So she'll share screen with you and get through that process. And it's pretty easy. Once you start the first one, then you can do the rest of them. And that's just if you decide to do it through Montana Memory Project. But I recommend that because that information is going to be held in perpetuity. They'll keep changing the format so that people will be able to access that for all the generations to come.
Do you think it would be possible to like almost check out that MP3 player to people for them to record like their own interview off of a list of questions if they're not willing to be interviewed necessarily?
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought about that. I would imagine it would probably be all right. I would sure ask Jennifer about that and see what she thought. But I mean, she's loaning it out to everybody else. Like she'd loan it to you or to me.
Okay.
Give them a private space or
Yeah.
something.
I just wasn't sure if the interview needed to have a person kind of conducting it for them, or if it could just be somebody going off of a list of questions if they weren't entirely comfortable talking to somebody else but wanted to record it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I've never had that happen. I've never had anybody that didn't want to sit down, and most people are pretty good about doing it. But I will say when you get started is you want to leave the recorder off and just let people talk, but try to talk about other things other than your subject matter. It's because it seems when I do that a couple of times, folks have told me really great stuff before the recorder was turned on. And then you can't recreate it. It's that the style, the information, it's gone. It's just not the same. So, talk about other things about, how's farming going? What have you been doing? How the crops been this year? What kind of bushel acreage are you getting? I mean, if that's something that they want to divulge, just things random, but associated with them or their business. How are your kids? How are your grandkids? Just going that way.
Okay.
Get them comfortable. That's important to get them comfortable.
Okay.
What else you got for questions?
One question. Gary, you got any questions?
No, I got lots of thoughts.
Well, you should share them. What do you think would be interesting to hear about oral history related to Geraldine?
Well, I want to do something about the history of aviation in Geraldine. We got a brand new airport. This should have been going on for the last 50 years. Some of the people that was associated with aviation and everything are gone now. Not many left to talk to.
That's true.
Are
And
they accessible? Like,
well, that book I was looking for the other
Mhm.
day, I found it on eBay. It's about, remember when Tom Harrod was here?
I know the name, but I don't.
Yeah, he was here, and he was well, not famous, but he was a World War II pilot. He flew the hump into China, and then he had a spraying service here, and he wrote a book. And then he updated it, and Hank Armstrong had it, but Stuart couldn't find it, so I ordered it, and I got it coming. So I think that'll be a good addition to the library here.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Wow, that's amazing. He flew the hump in China.
Oh, you know about that?
No, I know about that, but I didn't know that he was one of the aviators.
Yeah, Tom Harrod was an aviator. Gene Autry did it. He was one of the guys that did it too. I just found that out the other day.
Really?
There's a lot of history. We got a brand new airport, so that's why I thought it'd be good to try to get something going for this reunion, maybe
Oh, yeah.
just a tribute to some of the people that flew. I mean, there's dozens of people that used to fly out of the, Ray Bushman, Charlie Wright, that they put their name in the cement or something. I don't know. But
Right.
But like you say, like Bob Spivak just passed.
Bob was one of the aviators around here for 50 years.
Right, he'd have been one to get some information from, and
I can tell you a lot about Bob, and I got a picture of his old airplane. I
sure.
just saw it today, so
I think that's
That's
a great
all, I think.
idea.
we could do that.
So Candy, how do you necessarily then fact check things when you are like when you do not have as many people that are still currently around from that time? And
I just
there's not,
do. Go ahead.
there's not like a lot of published information on it. And so I just didn't know how you fact check that necessarily.
Well, you do your background resource check of your primary resources, which is, the original newspapers, documents, or transcripts from somebody's, private collections, but corroborate the information with other people. So a lot of times, like when I did the Métis interviews, is that the information was corroborated because the stories matched.
Okay.
Sometimes the stories don't match, and sometimes people are pretty creative in what they do, but that's part of oral history. That's something that's why it is important to have, as much information as you can up front that you already know. But that's what we do. That's why you want to try to get as many people as you can. I hate to hear that about the folks that have been passing away that were instrumental in that, in the airstrip, the airport, because that wouldn't have occurred to me, but that's a great subject.
Yeah.
Paul, what do you think would be interesting for the area?
I haven't really given it much thought. I mean, as far as the area, but I mean, there's people around like Kate Woodburn. Try to find some of these people that have.
Oh, yeah, she's still around.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
She was a postal.
yeah, no, and she still got her wits about her. I went and visited her about a year ago one time just for the heck of it, and
Yeah.
she'd be one to get some.
She's very
information out of.
nice to talk to.
Yeah,
She really is.
and
She's a special lady.
there's not many left that are of that age.
Well, and I hear about all these people because Eddie's he's very social. So I hear about all these people and about these things, or we'll ride past a ring and he'll tell me about, oh, so-and-so was a really good historian. And I'm like, it just goes right over my, like I don't
you don't know
know
the
from
names.
being outside of being not from here.
Yeah,
And so it's very interesting. I just thought your take would be interesting. So.
Well, and that would be a really neat, talking about a postmistress, that would be fun to talk to her. She's probably got some really great stories to tell. And I'm thinking about, I don't know if she was actually a rural route carrier too, but that could be a part of that, is to tell us some of the experiences about what it was like to be a rural route carrier. Back in the day, did you have trouble were you stuck a lot? Did you have to go through people's pastures to get to where you needed to be? What was it like? Did you ever find somebody on the road that you had to help? Did you have to dig somebody out of the snowbank? There's so many areas that you could just go off of. And I don't know much about postal work, but sure there's some great things, like what interesting things that came in the mail. Have you ever had any bombs, anything explode, anything, firearms, whatever it might be? There are probably stuff stolen.
There's another subject, because I sit and have coffee every morning with some of the older guys like Rich Clark. He's been a trucker around this country for 50 years or better. And some of the stories, you get 2 or 3 of them truckers together, pretty soon they're back in the 50s and the 60s when they trying to get home for Christmas. And I wished I'd had a recorder to just get Rich Clark some of his stories.
Rich would be another good one. Yeah.
So if people designate a subject matter and like a set of questions. Candy, do you do any like consulting on questions, or I mean, do you do anything like that to help
Mhm.
like help the
Yeah.
interview quality be higher? Yeah.
Yep, I can do that. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, all this different people that you're talking about, it doesn't have to be one subject matter, you know, just like Winifred, I just picked the people I thought in the community that were older that we needed to get their stories written down. And so, you know, their stories were all totally different. With some things that were, you know, crossed over and matched, but that makes for a really interesting read.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely help on that. I do the consulting on that. You know, I was thinking, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask what that would maybe look like. Would that just be like sending you a list of questions for you to go over, or would that be like more of a one-on-one meeting?
I guess it depends on however you want to do it, you know, whichever is easiest.
Okay,
Yeah, definitely.
thank you.
Yeah, general questions are good. General questions will lead you in directions that you never expected to go down. One of the ladies I interviewed was our neighbor down the road, and she said she was trailer trash when she and her husband were on road construction. And I never really thought about that, but they just took a travel trailer and went all over the state building roads. That would have been back in the 60s, I believe it was. And, you know, she talks about going into one of the grocery stores and they didn't want to help her because she was white trailer trash. I thought, wow, I would not have guessed that in rural Montana that would have happened, that people would have been so judgy, but so you never know what you're going to find out.
Hmm.
So the other thing on the grant for the Montana History Foundation is that starts, I think they open it January. So you want to be planning for that for 2025. I would plan for that. And I can help you develop that budget too. And you can probably get a pretty good chunk of change to do a big project. So, and like I said, the grant process is pretty simple. Samantha, have you done grants before?
I've done a few here recently. Yeah. Through Humanities Montana, I've done a couple, and then I just did one for our owl camera for Triangle. So
Perfect. So you know what it's all about then. Good deal. Good deal. So then the other thing that you need to think about is you've got all these really cool interviews, and instead of just sending the transcripts to the state, put it into a book form, and then you can have your background history of the area first, and then your oral interviews to follow. And you want to put lots of pictures in there. It's way more appealing to people to read it if they can look at the pictures, personal photos of folks. And it's I self-publish it instead of trying to find somebody to pick it up. And you know, if you sell your books, then it's going to pay for itself. I mean, I don't print very many of my books. I just do a limited edition. So I just want to make sure that they get out there. And what I'll do is I'll give those books to the people I interviewed. So I'll give each one of them one book, so they'll have it for their family, and then they usually buy more for their family members. But I think it's really a great way to make a little bit of income, get yourself out there, get Geraldine out there, you know, have a colorful cover on it. I just go through Minuteman Press in Missoula. Rebecca Treese is the one I deal with, and she's cheaper than anybody else. I just send her my stuff. I send her what I've done. And I've developed my own covers through Canva. Do you do Canva?
yeah.
Okay, cool. So, you can make your own covers through Canva, and you just set it up like it's in book form already. Send it to Rebecca, and she'll look at it and go, okay, it's going to cost you this much money, and I'll send it to somebody else to print it. She'll have it printed. they'll send it to her or to you directly, depending. Like we did have some trouble with one printer that the books rubbed on each other. And so you want to make sure that they have somebody that wraps each book, or at least puts a paper in between them, so that they're safe. But it's really nice. It's really nice to do that. And then it's makes your project more viable and has more meaning, because then you've got something in your hand to say, okay, look at your books, you've got a library.
Yeah.
Like if you don't do a book from it, then you're missing out. And you can probably double your money at least on it. It's not a big money maker, but enough.
Okay. Interesting.
Something to think about.
Would the Montana Histories grant, would that cover the publishing of those books? Or is that something you do out of pocket?
I do that out of pocket, but I make sure that when I do my budgets that I have enough to cover that, in my hours, because you're always going to have whatever 10% for overhead costs, and so I just consider that part of my overhead costs when I figure my budgets.
Okay. What has been your most enjoyable oral history project that you've worked on or subject?
I think my most favorite was Central Montana, and I'll show you the Métis. I'll show you the book.
That's the one you were telling me about, right, Gary?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Métis. I don't know if I can say it right. How do you say that?
Métis.
Métis? Okay.
Yep. Some of the Métis will say Metis, or
Yeah.
depends on where you're from, regionally. But that's okay. This is the book here. And the reason it's my favorite was one of the people I interviewed. She was a direct descendant of one of the Bergers, who was really one of the first people to come into Central Montana. He was Métis, of course. And she told me about the Métis cemetery up in Calvary Cemetery, about how there's this unmarked grave up there. And it was corroborated by another person I interviewed from down in Billings. So I said, wow, so what's this about this unmarked grave? Well, so apparently the first original Métis cemetery became a person that bought it later as pasture, and he wanted to move all the bodies out. So he asked the ladies of the Catholic Church, the Métis ladies, if they could do something, that people could move these bodies out to a different place. So one of the other Métis families donated the cemetery, the Calvary Cemetery now, to them, and they relocated those bodies into that cemetery. But when they went to dig the bodies out, because it was really lush, meadow, hillside, kind of loamy, the bodies were really deteriorated. So they took and some of them were buried in blankets. They were buried in Red River cart, boxes made out of Red River carts, which is what they used to transport their goods from Canada. So, there wasn't much there. They took the bones and commingled them. And we figured there's about 30 some graves, and there's 70 some people that are buried out there at the Calvary Cemetery, unmarked, totally unmarked. But luckily there was a woman that was interviewed. I mean, that's just the importance of interviews. She was interviewed back in the day, and she gave them a list of who she knew was buried in that location. Not all of them, but she knew most of the people. So we have an idea who they were. This gal that I interviewed, her name was Elisa Herodes. She said, I've always wanted to put a monument at that cemetery. And in fact, I've started a little fund 5-6 years ago. We had a couple of people donate too. We got $250 in the bank. And I thought, wow, well, that's really interesting. We got to talking about it more, and I really liked her. And I said, well, let me help you with this Métis cemetery project. See if we can do something with this. So we got to thinking about it and figured out what we would like to do there is to have some kind of a monument to remember these people by. And we had different ideas about what would be cool. There was kind of a wish list. She wanted to put bronzes. Well, we found out what bronzes were going to cost. It was going to be like 80,000 for bronzes of a Métis man or a woman, you know, reaching out across the top of where these graves were. So I went to Great Falls to actually do, it was a presentation to the History Museum on this book that I just showed you. And I talked about the Métis people, and afterwards we had the book signing and people came up and bought books. And this one guy comes up and he says, well, I don't want to buy a book, but I want to give you some money for your monument, because I had talked about this monument at this presentation. So here's another thing, you know, it's just like something you're passionate about. You never know who the right person is going to be that you talk to that's going to have the money. And that person said, I will help you pay for what you want. So he gave us, or he said he would give us 63,000 if we wanted to for this monument. Well, we ended up coming with a project that didn't come in to be 63,000, but it came in at, I don't know, it's under 40,000 what it cost. And we built this beautiful travertine monument. I mean, it's, I don't even know how, 16, 18 foot at the height. And it kind of looks like a bishop's hat, you know, the Catholic bishop's hat that's looks like this, but it's in 3 pieces. And in the centerpiece, I did the history of this was going on, what had happened here. And then on the other sides, it has the names of the people that are buried there. Well, the travertine came from the Little Shell tribe out of Idaho. So that it was amazing how everything fell into place. The guy that gave us the money, he said, well, you know, why don't you see what the tribe wants to do if they can kick in something and help? It just turned out that Elisa was elected to the tribal council. So she was right in a perfect position to ask for money. And instead of money, they said, hey, look, we've got this travertine mine. Let's just give you the stone and we'll engrave it. So they did all the stonework and the engraving. That's why it didn't cost us 63,000, is because the tribe donated a big chunk of that. Well, they've got a really cool celebration and powwow Labor Day weekend in Lewistown. It's the Métis celebration. So if you ever get a chance to come over there, you need to check it out if you have time. They have lots of dancing, and you know, it's really, the Métis history is really interesting. They do a lot of jigging, fiddle playing. The food is really great, and so we got the chance to unveil our monument at that celebration, and we had a tremendous turnout. We had the newspapers, TV came out and covered it. And you know, here, this thing has made such a difference in people's lives. I couldn't believe everybody that came up and said, oh my gosh, my great grandmother's relatives are, you know, our relatives are buried here. People that would come up, I mean, it makes me kind of emotional because they put their hands on the monument. You know, they'd put their hands on it and bow their heads, and they would cry because, you know, all these their family members that were buried in this grave and not identified. Well, they were, some of them were, but most of them were identified. Some of them were not, I should say, but still, you know, they're all commingled. It's kind of a sad story when you think about it. Although they were treated with great respect when they were reinterred by the Catholic people, the Métis people and the priest. But anyway, and it all started because I got a grant to do some oral interviews. That's how it started. You know, did the interviews, did a book signing. The guy showed up that wanted to give us money. I mean, it just so happened the person I interviewed was the right one. Elisa was the right one to interview. You know, she gave us the idea for the project, and it happened in a matter of 3 years' time. So just think of how much you can impact somebody else. You just don't know until you're in the middle of it. You know, I think it's by the grace of God myself. But so there it is.
Wow, it's amazing.
It is.
So the book you just showed us, how would I get my hands on that book? Is it in the library or?
It's going to be in the Lewistown Library, and I actually have, those are all sold now, so I don't have any left. I have some of the other book from Havre, but not from there, unfortunately. You can also I think you might be able to Google it and find it online. Somebody told me that it's downloaded somewhere. So you might be able to find it there too.
We could interlibrary loan it though from Lewistown if it's in Lewis. Yeah. So we could get that interested.
And if you get a chance, go to the Calvary Cemetery at Lewistown and see this monument because it's really cool. It's something else.
Here a few months ago, I had run into a guy, he was, I think, great grandson of Gabriel Dumont. You remember that guy? Run into him in Fort Benton.
Really?
Yeah, it's just kind of a coincidence. He's the guy that got Louis Riel to go to Canada for the Red River Rebellion when the Little Shell were getting run out of Canada or whatever. So
You know some history about them, don't you?
oh yeah.
Are you Métis?
I don't think so. I'm mostly Norwegian, I think.
Yeah.
Relatives have a ranch in North Dakota near, was it Turtle Mountain?
Yep. Oh, cool.
There's a lot of Métis or whatever around Lewistown. You just,
Yeah.
and they starting to admit, well, you know, some of them are pretty proud of their heritage anymore. You know, they say, oh, my grandmother, I got descendancy and things like that. So.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting when I interviewed folks, they talk a lot about what their grandmas and grandpas did or didn't do. And most of the time, what I found, I mean, I'll bet if I were to look at it, probably 90% of the time, the grandparents didn't want to talk about it. They just said they're French Canadian. They didn't want to admit they're Indian. When I looked at marriage certificates, death certificates, and birth certificates, I saw a lot of white listed on those. You know, and they were probably percentage wise, maybe 75%. A lot of them were Native American, 75% to 50, but they listed themselves as white because it was so much easier. So it's really cool to see that people are appreciating their heritage and finally, you know, realizing that's something to be proud of. They endured a lot of hostility, a lot. I mean, even the immigration laws back in the 19 teens, they prohibited citizenship for a lot of the Métis that have been living here since forever because they were originally from Canada. So
Didn't have a home or didn't have a tribe. They got kicked out of Canada, and there's several families around here like Burchard, Savoy, that come out of Minnesota, and there's a lot of Métis there in Minnesota. Talked to a guy from Minnesota. He said his grandfather run with Louis Riel in Minnesota. Then nobody even was familiar with that's where they come from, but I'm sure she is.
well, yeah, and that's right. And that would be really neat to have to interview those people too.
Yeah, there's still some left.
That'd be a nice little, I mean, all the folks that you've been talking about, boy, that'd be a really great book. Not just specifically about farming, but just the whole broad spectrum of this is who we are. This is what Geraldine is all about. We got a lot of folks that live here from a lot of different backgrounds and stories.
Yeah, as far as anybody with the name LaFontaine, any French name was probably most likely a Little Shell or Métis.
Yeah.
Some around Augusta and Choteau in that area.
Yeah, you know it. Yeah, you know it. And you know, I did a presentation, I think it was at Sun River down there, or at Fort Shaw, excuse me. And one of the ladies came up to me later and she said, you know, I think I'm Métis. And she told me what her family name was. And I said, oh yeah, you are. I mean, that's a common family name. And it was interesting because she started digging through it to find out about her ancestry. I've had that happen 2 times now with people that didn't realize that they had Métis ancestry, but they were drawn to these talks that I've been giving because they probably had it in the back of their mind. They probably were, but they didn't know about it. And so it's really interesting to see people embrace that. But these oral histories, that's what it does, is it brings it to light, and it makes people appreciate what the history and the background is, and that, yeah, it's important. And it just gives you a sense of pride. It gives them a sense of pride, the person that's talking. So, and a sense of community too. So it's important what you're doing.
Gary's one of our resident historians. He knows all, it seems like, for Geraldine.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time sitting around drinking coffee, and maybe in years past, sitting, having a beer with a lot of the guys that are not around anymore, you know, and like Jimmy Stoos, he was pretty good. He used to own the bar over here. He used to visit with him, and Cliff Scribner. I can maybe remember some of the things that they said, but they were.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, it would be really great to interview, for you to be an interviewee. And it would also be great for you to be an interviewer, because there's something about people that you're familiar with. Like a lot of the people I interviewed, I knew. And it's makes it even that much more comfortable when they can sit down and they can talk to you about it. So, you know, I really love the idea of having the kids do it, but I will tell you that it's not easy always for kids to ask the questions. You might get more of a, you know, okay, tell me about where you're from, you know, and then not follow up, and they'd be just reading right off the questions, and then you end up with an interview that's really flat. So, and maybe even pair a teenager with somebody that's older, that the person knows that you're interviewing, you know, to just make sure that you guys can follow up. And, you know, if the kid's interviewing, but then the other person would say, well, what about, you know, I remember you told me that you had this bull hook you, or, you know, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Just a better connection to the past.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you
Well, that's what,
ever-
you know, one of the things I find, if, and I haven't done it as much as I should, but just from my own parents talking to them about, you know, during World War II, what all went on here with rationing and things that the government forbid you from buying, like you couldn't own a spare tire, you couldn't purchase antifreeze, those kind of things. People don't realize what went on, you know. To me, that'd be a whole interesting topic to get out of some of these people that live through that.
Yes,
one of-
exactly.
Interesting people was your dad. When he started talking, he would have been a great person to interview, because, you know, his last few years, he wanted to tell everybody everything that he knew, because he wanted everybody to know it.
Yeah,
And he does have some of it
Oh,
in
did you?
in writing.
Yeah.
a little bit. He didn't get into a lot of detail. He wrote down sort of some family facts, but he didn't get into a lot of stuff that wish we would have got into with him.
Yeah.
My mom was a better storyteller than my dad.
Well, we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, I think I've told you about everything I know, unless you have any other questions.
I don't have questions right now. I'm assuming you'd be fine if I reached out to you with an email if a question or two came up, but.
Did Winifred boys play tonight? I think it's tomorrow night.
I don't know.
I think they play Box Elder either tonight or tomorrow night.
I'd have to ask my husband. I don't know.
Yeah,
I love,
that's a wrong
Like-
coffee.
they all know.
Yeah.
And I have,
But see, that's another thing. You remember when the Geraldine girls and everything went to state, and it's a big deal? Somebody should interview some of them girls and their parents. You know, that was quite a deal when they won the state championship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boys in their football time. Don't seem like much now, but you know, in 25 years, well, I can look back and might be important.
well, I mean, they have a pretty historic coach, just saying.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, yeah,
Like,
he's already in the Hall of Fame, I guess.
I mean, he is, but the oral history of it probably isn't,
Yeah.
you know?
See, that's a
Yeah.
whole one.
And like
right there.
the impact that people say that it had on young men growing up is pretty, I mean, I'm not from here and I feel like I know that.
Yeah,
So
well, you're close.
I don't know.
Were you from Wyoming or somewhere?
Mhm.
Well, that's not too far.
Wyoming and North Dakota, yeah.
Oh, what part of North Dakota? You might be Métis.
I'm from Bowman, North Dakota. Scranton is the small town that
Oh,
their ranch is at. And then my mom's across the border and uh it'd be like Lemon, South Dakota, Buffalo,
Oh.
South Dakota, that kind of
Oh,
area.
that's. one of
Camp
the
Crook
Sioux.
area.
Yeah, you let me meet you. with the Sioux.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. It's interesting what you think you are and what you might not be. I don't know,
Oh,
like
these- yeah,
people's like revelations are so interesting.
Yeah. But there's just a lot of history everywhere and I've been trying to keep up on as much as I can. The Métis is, I've been studying that for years. That's a couple books if you want to, besides her books, that, what is it? The Strange Empire?
Yep.
And that's a good one about Louis Riel. I don't know if you ever heard him. That's a great book.
You know, that Joseph Howard Kinsey, he's the one that wrote that book. And he's really quite an interesting character. He was from Great Falls. He liked to drink a lot. And he had a cabin up on the Circle 8 Ranch on the South Fork of the Teton River, which is about a mile from where my family cabin was on the North Fork of the Teton. So I grew up knowing the Gleasons that had the Circle 8 Ranch. Of course, Kinsey'd been dead by that time, but that whole area was settled by the Métis people when they fled from Canada. It's a box canyon. So they hid back in there and nobody knew that they were in there. Except for a few people later on. But when they came through in the 1890s to round up the Métis people, they missed them because they were hiding in that canyon. So Joseph Howard Kinsey, he got to know those families because they were still living in that Circle 8 Ranch area. And that's why he wrote the book, was because of that, because of his association with them there.
Yeah, I got so many books, I'll never get them all read, but I spent too much time watching videos on TV.
Well, guys, we're at about an hour. So did you want to have any more questions answered, or what do you think?
How about your copyright laws and everything? Is there somebody gonna, if it turns into a book, who's gonna have the copyright laws on the book, or is this all just public information, or?
Well, I just consider it public information, if people want to copy it, just like it when it got on the internet, it's all of a sudden popped up there and I went, oh, well, okay, well, it doesn't matter. It would have mattered if I had 10,000 copies of it, but since I didn't have that many, obviously, it was no big deal to me and it felt like, well, that's all right. But, I guess if you can copyright it if you want. But I mean, in the end, are you trying to make a lot of money on it?
Or is this gonna see, is somebody else gonna come and say, oh, this is our story, we had it before you, but.
Oh, good point. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, so there's one thing I did forget to tell you that's critical in this whole thing is that you need to have, and I can send you an example of this too. It's a release form, Samantha. So that's critical. You need to have the person sign that. So it releases their story and the use of their photographs to you. In that release form, the way I was set this up, and I based it on what I was told by another interview person, is to have the rights of those yourself. So that's your rights that you can publish and you can sell your books. That's how that works. But you got to make sure that they sign that.
Book.
So the other thing is, I mean, just a random little bit of tidbit, if you ever need to know it. If you guys are ever to do any kind of research on the reservations that might have something to do with Geraldine, I don't know what it would be. But like if you wanted to talk to somebody at Rocky Boy about, you know, their experiences in Geraldine, for example, you have to go to the tribal council to get permission. So there's tribes you have to find out who to talk to and go through a whole process. You know, like I had to talk to business council, I had to talk to Stone Child College, one of their heritage groups there to make sure and get permission. And it took me months to do it. But the most important part is to get that release signed. And I do have that template for you.
Okay, perfect.
So just email me and let me know if you want it or not.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for all of the information. I feel like we as a community have a lot of work to get to. Yeah,
Fun work, fun work.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Well, thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you being here, and thanks. This is my first one, so you're my virgin trip.
Well,
Good job.
yes,
Good job.
you did excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you very much. You guys, God bless you and have a great day today.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
too.
Thank you.
Thanks. Night.